What if the biggest leak of the 2026 era didn't expose a weakness, but revealed that Ferrari may already be racing in a version of the future no one else is ready for? Because when internal Maranello data quietly surfaced, the reaction across Formula One wasn't shock, it was disbelief. Not at the numbers themselves, but at what those numbers imply about how far ahead Ferrari may be in understanding the real challenge of the new regulations. Behind closed doors, teams aren't scrambling to copy Ferrari. They're realizing they might already be locked into concepts Ferrari consciously avoided months ago. And that's when concern turns into something much more uncomfortable. And here's why this story refuses to let go. If this leak reflects what insiders believe it does, then Ferrari hasn't just built a fast 2026 car, it's built one around a problem most of the grid hasn't even identified yet. And once you grasp what that problem really is, you start to understand why the people paying closest attention aren't going anywhere until the full picture finally comes into focus. Once the scale of this Maranello leak began to sink in, something unusual happened across the paddock. Teams didn't rush to deny it. They didn't rush to counter it. Instead, they began quietly reassessing decisions that had already been locked in. Because the leaked Ferrari data didn't point to a spectacular advantage, it pointed to a different definition of the problem. And in Formula One, misunderstanding the problem is far more damaging than lacking performance. Ferrari appears to have framed the 2026 challenge around constraints others still treat as temporary obstacles. What makes this leak so destabilizing is the timing. This information didn't surface at the beginning of the regulation cycle, when concepts were flexible and philosophies still debated. It emerged after most teams had already committed to architectures they can no longer unwind without catastrophic cost. Cooling layouts, energy recovery strategies, chassis integration assumptions. Ferrari's data suggests it deliberately avoided paths that looked attractive early but became fragile under long-term stress. That means rivals aren't just behind, they may be misaligned. Inside rival technical departments, the most uncomfortable conversations are no longer about Ferrari's pace. They're about Ferrari's restraint. The data implies that Maranello willingly accepted slower, early validation in exchange for long-term behavioral certainty. That choice only makes sense if you already understand where the real bottlenecks will emerge later. And if Ferrari truly saw those bottlenecks coming, then many teams may now be optimizing solutions to problems Ferrari intentionally refused to chase. There is also growing concern about how this affects the competitive narrative of 2026 itself. A car built around stability rather than peaks doesn't dominate immediately. It waits. It absorbs pressure. It lets others expose weaknesses through aggressive development. And then once the field begins to converge, it keeps improving while others plateau. That pattern has defined multiple dominant eras in Formula One, and it rarely announces itself until it's already irreversible. From an organizational perspective, this leak paints Ferrari in a way the paddock hasn't seen for years. Not reactive, not emotional, not chasing redemption headlines, but methodical, quietly confident. The SF-26 project, as suggested by this data, looks like the product of internal alignment rather than compromise. That matters because aligned organizations make fewer desperate decisions, and desperation is what usually destroys promising regulation resets. Even the FIA is reportedly watching this situation carefully, not because Ferrari appears to be bending rules, but because this leak challenges a fundamental assumption behind the 2026 framework that performance would naturally converge as teams wrestled with the same limitations. If Ferrari has already neutralized those limitations through early philosophical clarity, then convergence may not arrive the way it was intended to. And once that becomes visible on track, regulatory intervention becomes politically and technically explosive. And this is why no one is truly ready for the 2026 Ferrari yet. Because the biggest Maranello leak didn't reveal speed. It revealed foresight. It suggested a team that understood the cost of being wrong earlier than everyone else and built an entire project around avoiding that mistake. If that understanding holds once racing begins, then this leak won't be remembered as a warning that Ferrari was fast. It will be remembered as the moment the paddock realized Ferrari had already solved the part of 2026 everyone else was still trying to define. As the implications of this leak continue to ripple through the paddock, a more uncomfortable realization is starting to take hold. Ferrari didn't just anticipate the technical challenges of 2026, it appears to have anticipated the human ones. The tendency of teams to chase early validation, the pressure to show progress quickly, the temptation to lock in aggressive concepts before understanding their long-term cost. The leaked data suggests Maranello built its project assuming rivals would fall into those traps and designed the SF-26 to exploit that inevitability rather than fight it. What's particularly destabilizing is how this reframes Ferrari's apparent conservatism. What looked like hesitation now appears to be intentional delay. While others rushed to define the limits of the new rules, Ferrari focused on defining the consequences of crossing them. That distinction matters, because teams that rush to the edge often discover too late that retreat is impossible. Ferrari's data implies it stayed deliberately inside margins that others treated as temporary, buying itself freedom when everyone else was trading it away. Inside rival teams, there's now a quiet fear that Ferrari's advantage isn't technical, it's temporal. Time spent correcting instability is time not spent learning. Time spent protecting fragile systems is time not spent refining them. If Ferrari avoided those phases early, then its entire development timeline shifts forward. That doesn't show up in lap time charts. It shows up months later when one team is still solving foundational problems while another is already optimizing details that decide championships. There is also a growing sense that Ferrari's SF-26 was designed to wait. Not to dominate immediately, but to survive the chaos that inevitably follows a major regulation change. A car built to remain predictable when others become erratic gains leverage without forcing it. Rivals overextend, errors accumulate, development paths fragment, and the team that stayed calm early begins to look inexplicably strong once the noise fades. That pattern is familiar and deeply worrying to those who recognize it. From a psychological standpoint, this leak has done something even more damaging to Ferrari's rivals. It has introduced doubt after commitment. Engineers are revisiting decisions they can no longer change. Managers are questioning whether the urgency they imposed was misplaced. That internal doubt is corrosive because it fractures confidence just when teams need unity to recover lost ground. Ferrari, by contrast, appears insulated from that uncertainty, a difference that only grows more important under sustained pressure. Even politically, the leak alters the balance of conversation. A team that looks prepared rather than reactive gains quiet authority. When Ferrari speaks about feasibility, margins, or long-term behavior, those statements now carry weight shaped by data others don't fully possess. That influence doesn't manifest as control. It manifests as credibility. And in Formula One, credibility often shapes outcomes long before any rule is rewritten or clarified. And this is why the biggest Maranello leak of 2026 still hasn't revealed its final consequence. Because it didn't expose a finished weapon. It exposed a philosophy, one that assumes others will arrive late to the real problem. If Ferrari's understanding proves correct, then the SF-26 won't win because it was faster on day one. It will win because it was built to outlast confusion, pressure, and regret. And by the time the rest of the grid realizes that was always the point, the opportunity to respond may already be gone. As this story continues to develop, another layer of unease is beginning to dominate conversations behind closed doors. The leak didn't just reveal what Ferrari built, it revealed what Ferrari didn't build. Paths that others assumed were unavoidable were deliberately left unexplored in Maranello. Aggressive deployment strategies, narrow thermal margins, short-term performance spikes that look convincing in isolation but collapse under sustained pressure. Ferrari's data suggests those temptations were identified early and consciously rejected. That kind of restraint only exists when a team understands where the real damage will appear later. What's unsettling for rivals is that this decision-making appears to have been made without external confirmation. Ferrari didn't wait for consensus. It didn't wait for rivals to validate those risks publicly. It committed quietly, trusting its internal models enough to ignore what looked, at the time, like lost opportunity. Now that the leak has reframed those choices, teams are realizing Ferrari may have avoided entire categories of future problems others are now locked into solving under cost cap pressure. Inside technical leadership groups, this has triggered a difficult reckoning. If Ferrari is right, then some of the grid's most ambitious concepts may already be approaching their ceiling. Not because they lack speed, but because they lack tolerance. Tolerance for variation. Tolerance for heat. Tolerance for real-world racing chaos. Ferrari's approach appears to trade headline aggression for operational breathing room, and that breathing room is often where championships are decided once initial excitement fades. There's also growing attention on how this philosophy affects Ferrari's long-term adaptability. A system designed to operate comfortably within limits adapts more easily when conditions change. new fuels, software refinements, regulatory clarifications. All of these are easier to absorb when the baseline isn't already stretched thin. Rivals are starting to worry that Ferrari's SF26 won't just survive change, it will benefit from it, while others are forced into reactive redesigns they can't afford. From a competitive psychology standpoint, this leak has already done damage. It has planted doubt where certainty once existed. Engineers are second-guessing assumptions they were confident in months ago. Managers are questioning whether urgency replaced understanding too early. That internal hesitation doesn't show up on lap charts, but it erodes execution, and execution is where close seasons are won and lost. Ferrari, by contrast, appears to be operating with increasing internal clarity as others fragment. Even the narrative around 2026 is starting to shift quietly. This no longer feels like a wide-open reset where everyone arrives equal. It feels like a slow separation between those who chased immediate answers and one team that invested in asking the right questions first. The Maranello leak didn't prove Ferrari will dominate. It suggested Ferrari may be the only team that truly understood what not to chase and when restraint would become a weapon. And this is why no one is truly ready for the 2026 Ferrari yet. Because the biggest Maranello leak didn't reveal a finished advantage. It revealed a mindset that treats the new era not as a sprint, but as a test of endurance, discipline, and foresight. If that mindset translates into consistent execution on track, then the shock won't come from a single race or result. It will come slowly, as the rest of the grid realizes that while they were trying to win the future quickly, Ferrari was quietly building something designed to last longer than all of them. As the fallout from this Maranello leak continues, another unsettling dimension is becoming harder to ignore. Ferrari doesn't appear to be optimizing for advantage, it appears to be optimizing for survivability. In a regulation reset where volatility was expected to punish even the best prepared teams, Ferrari's data suggests the SF26 was designed to remain coherent when others inevitably fracture. That is a fundamentally different objective. It assumes chaos is coming. It assumes rivals will overreach. And it assumes the real opportunity will arrive not at the beginning of the cycle, but once the grid starts paying the price for early ambition. What's deeply uncomfortable for rival teams is that this approach doesn't rely on guessing who will be fastest. It relies on predicting who will struggle. Ferrari's leaked data implies an understanding of where the new rules apply pressure over time, thermal fatigue, energy cycling degradation, control system stress areas that don't show up clearly in early benchmarks. Those pressures accumulate silently. Teams that chased short-term validation may only realize the cost when they no longer have the freedom to escape it. Ferrari appears to have built the SF26 assuming that moment would arrive. Inside rival technical groups, there is now growing concern that Ferrari's concept is designed to wait out the field. Not to overwhelm it, to endure it. A car that stays predictable as others oscillate gains leverage without ever forcing the issue. Strategies become simpler. Drivers become calmer. Mistakes become rarer. And when rivals are forced into aggressive corrections just to stabilize their platforms, Ferrari can afford to keep refining quietly. That dynamic has defined dominant eras before results made them obvious. There's also increasing focus on how this philosophy affects Ferrari's long-term ceiling. A stable foundation doesn't cap performance, it delays its release. Once others reach the limits of their fragile architectures, Ferrari may still have margin to unlock. And unlocking performance on a stable base is far more efficient than trying to stabilize performance that was forced too early. This is where timing becomes decisive. Not who arrives fastest, but who still has somewhere to go once everyone else starts running out of options. From a psychological standpoint, the leak has already created asymmetry. Ferrari is now perceived as a team that knows something. Whether that perception is fully justified almost doesn't matter. Perception shapes behavior. Rivals second guess. Ferrari executes. That imbalance in confidence influences decisions long before cars ever line up on the grid. And in Formula One, confidence often dictates how aggressively teams are willing to commit to the next step forward. Even within Ferrari, this leak is believed to have reinforced internal alignment rather than disrupted it. The data supports decisions already made. It validates restraint. It quiets internal debate. When an organization stops arguing about direction, progress accelerates naturally. Rivals, by contrast, are now reopening discussions they thought were closed, the most expensive kind of delay, under a cost cap. That divergence in organizational momentum may end up being one of the most decisive consequences of this entire episode. And this is why the biggest Maranello leak of 2026 still hasn't reached its true climax. Because it didn't expose a finished advantage. It exposed a strategic posture, one that assumes the real test of the new era hasn't even begun yet. If Ferrari is right, the defining moments of 2026 won't come when the lights go out at the first race. They'll come later, when pressure builds, margins shrink, and the grid begins to fracture under its own early decisions. And when that happens, the team that prepared not to shine early, but to remain intact may be the one no one can catch once it finally decides to move.